Welcome to the deep dive. You gave us a stack of sources on, well, one of the most immediate and pretty consequential changes to U.S. policy this year.
Yeah, we're talking about the September 2025 proclamation by President Trump.
Exactly. We're diving into that dramatic decision to institute a staggering $100,000 annual fee
Annual, yeah.
on H-1B visa petitions for these high-skilled specialty occupations, but specifically when filed from outside the U.S.
That six-figure number, I mean, it's clearly designed to stop you in your tracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, visa fees are, administrative costs. They cover processing.
Right. Just the paperwork.
Exactly. This is not a processing cost. This is an economic intervention, a big one.
Absolutely. And the administration's stated goal seems pretty clear. Protect American jobs, maybe curb what they see as system abuse.
And ensure only the most highly paid, most necessary talent comes in. That's the line, anyway.
But our sources, I mean, they're pretty much uniformly calling this a tariff on talent. And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To understand the complex, maybe unpredictable costs of putting up an economic barrier this big.
Exactly. This deep dive, it isn't just about the weeds of immigration law. It really affects how fast companies innovate, whether startups can even compete with the giants, and ultimately whether the U.S. keeps its edge in critical fields. Think AI, biotech, semiconductors. It feels like a massive risk, honestly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Maybe start with the basics. For listeners who only know H-1B as sort of a political football, what was it originally designed for, historically speaking?
Sure. So the H-1B program, it's been around since 1990. It was created pretty specifically to let U.S. employers fill high-skill gaps.
Gaps in the workforce.
Right. It focuses on what are called specialty occupations, things that need at least a bachelor's degree, usually more, in technical fields, engineering, science, tech. The basic idea was, look, sometimes the U.S. just needs to import talent when the domestic supply can't keep up with demand, especially in fast-moving areas.
And it's always been controversial, hasn't it? There's always been this tension. Critics, like we see in the sources, argue companies misuse it.
Yeah, the classic argument is substituting cheaper foreign labor for U.S. workers or maybe depressing wages overall.
While supporters say.
Supporters argue it brings in vital skills, diversity, boosts global competitiveness, especially now in emerging fields like AI or quantum computing.
So that tension explains why past reforms often focused on things like the lottery system or those prevailing wage rules.
Exactly. Prevailing wage was key. The idea was, okay, you have to pay the H-1B worker, at least the average wage, for similar U.S. workers in that area.
To prevent undercutting.
Right. But the debate was always, do companies really comply? Is the calculation actually high enough? It was about tweaking the existing system.
Okay, so past efforts tried to make sure workers weren't, undercutting the market. But now we have this $100,000 hammer. Let's get into the mechanics. It's not just a one-time hit, right?
No, and that's absolutely crucial. It's $100,000 annually, paid by the employer.
Every year. Wow.
And it applies to new petitions filed from outside the U.S. for those specialty roles. The aim seems pretty clearly to force companies hired domestically or, well, find local talent somehow.
What's really striking in the sources, though, is the amount of just ambiguity and panic this has caused, especially for people already here on H-1Bs.
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge uncertainty factor built right in.
How so?
Well, the proclamation seems to exempt current H-1B holders and maybe renewals if they stay inside the U.S.
If they stay put.
Right. But what happens if that worker needs to travel internationally? Family emergency conference, whatever. Or what if they're, say, an F1 student converting to H-1B and they visit home briefly during that process?
Oh, I see.
The sources say immigration lawyers are basically in crisis mode because the rules aren't clear. What counts as a new petition versus just continuing status, especially if someone needs to travel?
So let's take an example. A highly paid software architect in Silicon Valley, maybe originally from Mumbai, goes home for a month, family reasons. While they're gone, the company needs to renew or amend their visa. Does that trigger the $100K?
That is precisely the fear. It's paralyzing. Until there's clear guidance, companies kind of have to assume the worst-case scenario.
And for smaller firms?
For them, that risk alone might be enough to just freeze all international hiring, maybe even restrict essential employee travel.
Yeah.
And then you have things like the national interest exemptions mentioned.
Adding more complexity.
Exactly. It just piles on the uncertainty.
Okay, that leads us right into the next point. Who are these workers, really? The rhetoric sometimes paints this broad picture, but the sources suggest a very specific kind of contribution.
They really do. We're often talking about people with advanced degrees, masters, PhDs, frequently from top U.S. or global universities.
So not entry level.
Generally not. These are engineers, advanced data scientists, specialized researchers. They're often critical personnel, not just, filling seats.
And the sources really emphasize their contribution level. High-pressure deadlines, patents, research breakthroughs, building out major infrastructure. One source called them the engine room of the digital economy.
And that intensity, that specific skill set, is why companies say they rely on them. It's often not just about cost saving. It's genuinely a specialized skill shortage.
Can you give an example?
Sure.
Yeah.
For companies building, say, next-gen quantum computing software, and maybe there are only like 20 people in the world with that precise expertise,
Okay.
shutting the door on half of them because of a $100,000 fee doesn't magically make a qualified U.S. citizen appear to fill that role. The role might just stay empty.
Okay, let me push back just a bit, though, thinking about that historical critique. If they're so skilled, why the wage controversies? Don't the sources acknowledge some H-1B workers accept lower wages?
That's where the nuance comes in, and it's important. Yes, it's true. Some individuals, particularly those working for certain types of firms, often the large outsourcing firms that get a lot of scrutiny.
The ones often accused of abuse.
Right. They might accept more modest pay, partly because their visa status is tied directly to that specific job. There's a dependency there.
But that's not the whole picture.
Not at all. The majority of H-1B workers, especially at top U.S. tech firms, R&D labs, universities, they're paid highly competitive salaries,
Yeah.
often well into six figures. So this idea that all H-1B workers undercut wages is a huge oversimplification. It's a really diverse group.
Understood. Okay, let's shift to the economic core here, this tariff on talent idea. What does that actually mean in practice for the economy?
Well, a tariff basically is a tax on imports. It makes foreign goods more expensive to protect domestic industries. This $100,000 fee functions exactly the same way. It sharply increases the price for U.S. firms to import skilled human capital. And that price hike forces pretty predictable economic shifts.
Yeah.
Our sources point to four main consequences.
Okay, let's take these one by one. The first, maybe the most obvious, reduced volume of hiring.
Absolutely. Just think about a small tech startup, maybe venture-backed, couple million in the bank. They need one crucial machine learning engineer to build their product.
Okay.
Suddenly, hiring that one person costs an extra $100,000 a year, on top of salary, benefits, everything else. For many startups, that's just prohibitive.
So they just don't hire.
They might stop hiring foreign talent completely. And if they can't find the skill domestically, maybe that critical position just stays unfilled. Innovation slows down.
Which leads to possibility number two, a shift in hiring practices. Maybe the fee works as intended. Firms invest more in training Americans.
That's certainly the hope expressed by proponents. And yeah, it's possible. Firms would feel pressure to invest way more in domestic training programs, maybe raise domestic wages significantly to attract talent.
Right.
But that's not an overnight fix, right? Training a senior AI engineer takes years. And those higher domestic wages, they inflate the cost structure for U.S. companies, potentially making them less competitive globally.
Okay. Then the third consequence is the big strategic worry, relocation risk. This is where the policy could actually undermine its own goal of keeping jobs here.
This is the real danger, strategically speaking. If bringing a top engineer to the U.S. becomes prohibitively expensive.
Companies will just keep the work where the talent already is.
Exactly. Or they'll move R&D centers, software teams, technical operations to cheaper, talent-rich hubs abroad. Think India, Eastern Europe, Canada maybe?
So the need for the talent doesn't go away.
No. The policy just potentially eliminates the U.S. as the location for that high-value work. It incentivizes offshoring, ironically.
So we've effectively put up a sign saying, please do your cutting-edge R&D somewhere else.
That's the fear. And it leads straight to the fourth consequence the sources identify, innovation loss.
How so?
By restricting access to the best global talent in these super competitive fields, AI, biotech, quantum buddy, the U.S. seriously risks losing its technological edge.
To countries with more open policies.
Yeah, places like Canada, the UK, the EU, they're actively trying to attract the very talent this policy makes it harder to hire here.
And this isn't just some abstract concern for listeners, is it? If U.S. companies have to offshore R&D, or if they just slow down developing new tech because they can't get the engineers.
That impacts the cost of the software you use every day. It slows down new medical treatments. It affects the stock performance of the companies driving the U.S. economy.
So the tariff on talent ultimately gets paid by consumers?
In a way, yes. Through slower innovation, potentially higher costs, reduced competitiveness. That's the argument.
Let's shift gears and look at the data, because the numbers really show who gets hit hardest by this, whether that was the specific intention or not. Let's maybe quickly touch on who the sources think might benefit.
Okay. Well, on the surface, you could say maybe some politicians who pushed for it. Potentially some U.S. workers competing for certain roles might see less competition, maybe higher wages in the short term.
And ironically.
Ironically, big tech might actually benefit. The huge companies, the Googles and Microsofts, they can afford the $100 K fee per employee.
Right.
What it does is squeeze out their smaller competitors, startups, mid-sized firms. They can't easily absorb that cost. So it could actually consolidate power in the hands of the giants who can pay.
But the data on the disproportionate impact, it's pretty stark, particularly regarding Indian nationals.
It's unavoidable when you look at the numbers. Indian nationals consistently account for, what, 71% to 72.3% of all approved H-1B visas?
Over 70%.
Yeah. So this fee, while it's written neutrally, it overwhelmingly burdens people from one specific country, the country that happens to supply the vast majority of specialized tech labor coming into the U.S.
And that huge volume also meant this group was already facing hurdles even before this massive fee, right?
Exactly. The sources note that approvals for Indian applicants had already dropped significantly, like 37% between early 2023 and early 2025.
37% drop before the fee.
Yeah. That points to existing backlogs, friction in the system already. So this new $100,000 cost isn't just reducing the flow. For many smaller companies relying on this talent pool, it threatens to just stop it cold.
If we zoom out from just H-1B numbers, what does this reliance on foreign talent look like for U.S. research for those really advanced roles?
Well, overall in the STEM workforce, foreign-born workers are about 19%. That's significant, sure. But the dependence gets much, much higher at the top end.
How high are we talking? Give us the hard numbers.
Okay, at the doctorate level, PhDs, foreign-born individuals make up 58% of computer and mathematical scientists in the U.S. workforce.
58%.
And 56% of engineers with doctorates. Just think about that. More than half the people driving cutting-edge research, publishing key papers, developing core algorithms in fields like AI, they're foreign-born.
Wow.
That data really throws into question whether the U.S. can maintain its leadership position without actively attracting global talent.
And it highlights the gap, doesn't it? You mentioned domestic job growth. Software development, for example, projected to grow, what, 17%?
Something like that, yeah, over the next decade. Huge growth.
So if our own universities and training programs can't produce enough people fast enough to meet that demand,
then closing the main valve for specialized international talent doesn't necessarily mean Americans fill those jobs. It might just mean those critical jobs stay vacant.
which makes the policy potentially look less like protectionism and more like...
Like self-sabotage, some argue. You're voluntarily cutting off your access to the very people needed to staff your fastest-growing, highest-value industries.
Okay, let's game out the time frames then. The immediate impacts, say, the next year or so. What does that chaos look like on the ground according to the sources?
Just massive uncertainty and disruption, companies scrambling, legal teams completely overloaded. Critically, you'll see venture-backed startups putting expansion plans on hold, shelving specialized hiring.
And those Indian tech firms with big U.S. operations.
They'll likely immediately shift any work they can offshore to mitigate the cost and risk. So the immediate effect could actually be job loss from the U.S. and offshoring the exact opposite of the stated goal.
Then moving into the medium term, maybe 1 to 3 years out, the adjustments start to become more permanent.
Yeah, that's the fear. R&D investment might permanently shift to places where talent is cheaper and easier to access.
Yeah.
You might see some domestic wages rise, which sounds good. But it comes at the cost of U.S. companies being less competitive globally. And it could fuel inflation within the tech sector. And crucially, the sources predict a potential decline in new, innovative startup formation. Silicon Valley's model relies on access to global talent, if that gets too expensive.
Investors might get spooked.
Exactly. The risk-reward calculation changes, especially for early-stage, deep tech companies.
And then the long-term view, 3 years plus, that's where the real strategic damage could settle in.
That's the concern about reputational and strategic erosion. Unless there's a massive overnight revolution in domestic STEM education and training, which seems, frankly, unlikely, those skill shortages will persist.
In the U.S. image.
More importantly, maybe The U.S. risks permanently damaging its reputation as the go-to place for the world's best and brightest. Think about it. Why would a top engineering student from India or China aim for Stanford or MIT if they know getting hired afterwards is incredibly expensive and uncertain for their potential employer?
They might just go to Canada or Europe or stay home.
Precisely. We could lose out on attracting that next generation of innovators before they even get here.
So the sources seem to converge on this idea. America's strength, particularly in tech and science, comes from being a magnet for global talent.
That's the core argument.
And if Washington makes it prohibitively expensive or complex to bring those minds in, are we really protecting the economy? Or are we just slowing it down, making it less competitive?
And potentially just handing our advantage in crucial fields like AI and biotech straight to our global rivals.
The consensus in these sources seems to be, look, the intention helping domestic workers might be understandable to some,
Sure.
but the execution, this huge, blunt, $100,000 annual fee is likely to cause severe unintended damage that might outweigh any perceived benefits.
It could encourage the very offshoring it claims to fight and ultimately weaken the nation's own tech foundations. That's the risk highlighted.
Which leaves a really tough question for you, the listener. If the goal is to protect workers and boost domestic training, but you want to do it without killing innovation and driving talent away, what else could be done? What specific, maybe more targeted policy short of this $100,000 tariff could address the skill gap honestly, while still keeping the door open for the global talent the U.S. seems to rely on? Something to think about until our next deep dive.
Subscribe for more.